Okay, Anthony, I'll try and answer in several stages. Firstly, I define the type of science I do as emancipatory science. What this means is it's the answer to the question of what is the motivation for doing science. The basic or first motivation for science is what's called the technical motivation to get superior control over nature. This has a long history, of course. Secondly, apart from control over nature, we have a motivation. What motivates social science is to learn to better understand how human society works in order to be able to collaborate with others and organize for human beings to organize themselves better. But beyond that, there's a third and deeper motive, and that's the motive of emancipation. That's to say that science is a contributor to the eternal struggle of human beings for freedom. Right? Now, that does not mean partisan science. Right? It doesn't mean that science should line up with one party or another in some debate. Right? Science doesn't take a Republican position about whether education should be based on behaviorism or some other theory, for instance, or Vygotskyism. It doesn't line up on the question of democracy versus dictatorship. Right? Science may come to conclusions and contribute to these debates, but its purpose is always simply to enhance human freedom. Right? So that's the basis on which scientists with widely different political views can collaborate on scientific questions because they're united by a common aim, and that's to enhance human freedom. That's to say, emancipatory science. Of course, that's not always the case. Scientists can, for instance, work for a tobacco company to find proofs that tobacco is good for your health, or work for an asbestos company to show that if you keep the particulate level below 1 part in a million, then it's safe to work in it or something. Both, of course, are scientifically false and antipathetic to human freedom. Right. So that's the first thing. That's where I come from with this question of freedom. Now, we had a discussion earlier in which we observed and confirmed between the two of us that whether you're on the right wing of politics or the left wing of politics, we all share a conviction that the aim of what we're trying to do is freedom. So that's very interesting, isn't it? Because unless you have a common object, it's impossible. There's no basis for collaboration, right? You can go your separate ways and live in peace, but to actually collaborate, you need to have a common objective. So, for example, in any nation, modern nation, which is not based on, for instance, the Jews are in charge and the Arabs can't be citizens, or whites are in charge and the blacks at a lower position. A modern nation where it doesn't matter what your religion is or your ethnicity or your political beliefs, you're all citizens and you have to share in running the country. So if you're going to collaborate in running the country, and so-and-so's a liberal and so-and-so's a Labour person, or so-and-so's a Green and so-and-so's a Republican, on what basis can you collaborate? Well, there's an outstanding principle, the principle of emancipation. That's to say, freedom. Now, of course, that doesn't solve the problem because closer examination shows that there are very different understandings of what freedom means and how it can be attained, how it can be realized, right? But it's not like they're just ships in different oceans. There's inevitably a lot of overlap. So, for example, there's a general idea that freedom means that an individual should be able to do whatever they want to do. I mean, what would be freedom that didn't include a person being able to do whatever they wanted, right? But closer examination of that shows that that's a poor definition because, for example, someone that spends their life staring at the commercial television will have a desire to have a big car and, the latest fashion in clothes or something, and they pursue that desire. But of course, that desire has been put into them, if you like, by someone else. They're being manipulated. So they're not free. But even at a deeper level, we'll leave advertising and manipulation aside. We all need food, warmth, love, safety. We have some basic human needs, and we are prisoners of those needs. You don't have a choice about wanting to have enough to eat. You're a prisoner of that choice. So the first question of freedom is that you have to be able to determine what it is you want. You have to be, it's not enough to be free to do what you want. It's be able to be free to determine what it is that you want, right? So that means, for example, there must be in a society the access to basic provisions of human needs for everyone before everyone can freely choose what it is they want to do. Because otherwise they're prisoners of the need to get something to eat. And if necessary, they will rob somebody else to get it. And if there are people out there robbing, it's a necessity for people to put up walls, lock their doors, and so on. So clearly, it's a precondition of freedom that social normality and peace and some level of prosperity is open to everyone. Now, the other thing is some societies have people spending all day, not all day, but every day, spending time in church, right? Praying. Okay. Other societies don't want to do that. So society also has to make a choice over and above meeting basic needs, what kinds of activities it's going to make possible, which means that people need, if they're to be free, to determine the policies of their government. Right? Otherwise, you can't be free because you'll find yourself in some country where all that's provided for is, for instance, football. And people are interested in football get whatever they want, but people that are interested in art don't have any access to it because the government's made a decision not to make provisions for art, but provide for sport, or vice versa, right? So a basic precondition to freedom is a participation along with others in determining how the resources of society are going to be utilised. But how can you participate if you are completely ignorant of political life and political issues? So there are a whole lot of preconditions to participation in electoral politics, for example, and in political discourse, which are necessary preconditions to freedom. You can't be free unless you're able to read and understand what you read, unless you have access to social networks where you can learn what's going on in the world, unless you have media, which isn't run by advertisers, but it is run in order to deliver for the purpose of providing citizens with information they need, right? So, I mean, one could go on because the story doesn't end with, free speech and free media and political elections. It turns out that I'll go one more stage. For example, a basic thing is when having established that people need certain rights, which include fundamentally the right to private property, the right to control your own body, and to have a sort of space where you can live, access to the tools of your trade, exclusive from anyone else, basic rights that are needed for freedom for participation in life. Over and above that, a basic need for freedom is to live in a society where everybody has some commitment to the general good. You cannot be free in a society filled with individualist, narcissistic sociopaths, right? Doesn't matter what education system we've got, what electoral system we've got, you cannot be free living in a community filled with selfish psychopaths. You can only be free where everybody is dedicated to the general good, even though everyone will have a different conception of what the general good is. If they're dedicated to it, then they will work with others to figure out a road. Aristotle said, the good life for humanity is seeking the good life for humanity, right? Not to say that there's some definition of what that is, except to go searching for what it is. That's more than 2,000 years ago, and it remains very true today. So when I'm doing science, it's part of that creating the conditions for people to be free in that general sense. And a definition that people should be able to do what they like is an inadequate definition of freedom. And living in a time of a pandemic, this is obviously true. Now, the Western world, at least, has been free of pandemics of a very serious kind and free of serious, highly infectious diseases for a long time. I remember in my childhood, polio had really only just been overcome when I was a child. But if you were around in days of polio, you didn't muck about the question of vaccination, right? You wanted to get vaccinated because what it did to kids was terrible. And in the early part, 100 years ago from now, vaccination was highly regarded because everyone knew about typhoid, yellow fever. All these diseases were rife in communities, and public health measures of all kinds, not only vaccination, but sewerage, clean water systems, all these things were making life better for everyone. And the workers' movement, poor people, unions, middle-class people, all united in the need for public health, which meant, you don't shit in the drinking water, right? Preventing people from shitting in the drinking water was a necessary precondition for freedom for everybody. And everyone 100 years ago, and America was a leader in this field, understood that freedom means restrictions on the spread of diseases. If someone's got an infectious disease, they're not allowed to get out and spread it among other people. And if it means locking someone up who's committed no crime other than to have an infectious disease which they caught off somebody else, then that's just life, right? Because freedom isn't something that just adheres to an individual, right? So if you've got AIDS, you can't just go around having sex with anybody, right? If you've got COVID, you can't just go out into the street and mix with other people, infecting other people. Freedom requires that. So it's not just enough to say freedom is being able to do what you like. It's qualified by having a sense of accepting the general laws and customs of the community you're living in, and yourself having a commitment to the general good, and in fact understanding that your own individual good can only be achieved through everyone achieving freedom. That freedom can't be attained individually. Now, a final note. In chat, the principal contribution that I think we've made to this is actually in activity theory, that Leontief, he did a theory of personality. And also you've got Vasilyak, who was a Moscow physiotherapist, and he developed a theory of of the development of the personality through periods of ania. And they both showed how the personality develops through the experience of commitments to different principles and causes, right? And that as these principles or projects, if you like, come into difficulties, then the person has to overcome them. Or when you have a clash of principles, when you're dedicated to both work and family, but then work and family come into clash with each other. The personality develops through these. And the structure of that theory of the personality turns out to be like parallel or very similar to Hegel's theory of morality, which brings together the obligation of the individual to commit themselves to the general good through their own initiative, together with an acceptance that the community as a whole was inherited from the past, knowledge about what is safe and right to do, that the individual can't just reinvent off the top of their head. Therefore, you have to respect the law in that critical way, right? So that's commitment to things that principles that are outside yourself, not just thinking you can invent some project or idea out of your head. Right? And for me, whereas Hegel did it through morality or ethics, I suppose I tended to see it in terms of a social theory. That is to say, how people in fact work. And of course, people do what they decide to do. So how people in fact work is also a theory of ethics. That is to say, what they ought to do is not actually a distinction in science between what people must do and what they ought to do. And Chet makes an important contribution to that in its activity theory. Okay, I've gone on far too long. I'll leave you to edit that out. Thanks, Anthony.